The rain hammered against the kitchen window of Maria's cramped studio apartment as she stared at the thermometer in disbelief. 103.2 degrees. Her daughter Sophia's small body trembled with fever, her usual bright brown eyes glazed and unfocused as she whimpered softly against Maria's chest. "Mama's here, mi amor," Maria whispered, pressing her lips against Sophia's burning forehead. "Mama's here." But even as she said the words, Maria's heart was breaking. She glanced at the clock on the microwave. 5:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, she needed to be on the bus that would take her to the Thornton estate, where she worked as a housekeeper. In 43 minutes, she needed to be standing in the pristine marble foyer, ready to begin her day maintaining the sprawling mansion that tech billionaire Alexander Thornton called home. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about Sophia. Maria had been working at the Thornton mansion for 8 months, ever since she'd moved to Connecticut from Texas, desperate for a fresh start after Sophia's father had abandoned them both. The job paid well, better than anything else she'd been qualified for with just her high school diploma, and it came with health insurance that had been a godsend for Sophia's regular checkups and vaccinations. But it also came with strict rules, and rule number 3 was crystal clear: no children on the property. Ever. Mr. Thornton's estate manager, the austere and unforgiving Patricia Wells, had made that abundantly clear during Maria's interview. "Mr. Thornton values his privacy and his peace above all else," Patricia had said, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "This is a place of business, not a daycare. Personal matters stay personal and off the grounds." Maria had nodded eagerly, grateful just to have the opportunity. She'd arranged for Sophia to attend a small home daycare run by Mrs. Chun, a kind grandmother in their apartment building. The arrangement had worked perfectly for 8 months. Until now. Mrs. Chun had called at midnight, apologetic and worried. Her own daughter had gone into early labor, and she was flying to California first thing in the morning. The daycare would be closed for at least 2 weeks. Maria had spent the next 6 hours desperately calling every contact in her thin phone list, searching for someone, anyone, who could watch Sophia. But she was still relatively new to the area, and the few acquaintances she'd made either couldn't help or didn't answer their phones at such an ungodly hour. Sophia let out another weak cry, and Maria felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. She couldn't take Sophia to the hospital, not yet, not unless the fever got worse. The urgent care bill last month when Sophia had an ear infection had decimated her savings. And she couldn't miss work. She'd already used 2 of her 5 annual sick days when Sophia had that ear infection, and Patricia had made it clear that excessive absences would not be tolerated, insurance or no insurance. "I'm so sorry, baby," Maria whispered, making a decision that made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. "You're going to have to come with Mama to work today. Just for today. Just until I can figure something else out." She knew it was wrong. She knew she was risking everything. But what choice did she have? By 6:45 a.m., Maria was standing in the service entrance of the Thornton mansion with Sophia wrapped in a soft blanket, still feverish and drowsy from the children's fever reducer Maria had given her. The morning staff wouldn't arrive until 8 a.m., the cook, the groundskeeper, and Patricia herself. Maria had a window of opportunity to get Sophia settled somewhere safe and hidden. The mansion was almost absurdly large for one person. 12 bedrooms, 14 bathrooms, a home theater, an indoor pool, a library that could rival a small-town collection, and a wine cellar that reportedly held bottles worth more than Maria's annual salary. Alexander Thornton, at just 33 years old, had made his billions developing artificial intelligence software that revolutionized data security. He was brilliant, driven, and according to every piece of information Maria had gathered from the other staff, completely dedicated to his work and his solitude. He was also, Maria had noticed during their few brief interactions, surprisingly kind. Not warm, exactly. He had a natural reserve that seemed to keep everyone at arm's length, but he'd never been rude or dismissive. He'd learned her name within the first week, which was more than could be said for most wealthy people she'd worked for in Texas. He'd even asked her once how she was settling into Connecticut, seeming genuinely interested in her answer. But kindness and understanding about a sick child being smuggled into his meticulously maintained sanctuary were two very different things. Maria knew the mansion's rhythms intimately after 8 months of working there. Mr. Thornton was usually in his home office on the 3rd floor until noon, rarely emerging except for the coffee the cook prepared at 7 a.m. sharp and left outside his office door. The guest wing on the 2nd floor was never used. Mr. Thornton apparently didn't entertain often, if ever. One of the rooms there had an adjoining sitting area with a comfortable sofa and a door that locked from the inside. It was as far from Mr. Thornton's usual domain as possible. It would have to do. Moving as quickly and quietly as she could, Maria carried Sophia through the service corridors and up the back staircase that the staff used. Sophia had fallen into a fitful sleep against her mother's shoulder, her little fingers clutching Maria's uniform. With every step, Maria's heart pounded harder. If Patricia caught her, she'd be fired immediately. If Mr. Thornton found out, the same fate awaited her. But Sophia was her whole world, her reason for breathing. The little girl with her father's curly dark hair and Maria's stubborn spirit, who loved butterflies and singing and the way the wind felt on her face. Maria would risk anything for her, even this job that was their lifeline. She reached the guest wing without incident and slipped into the farthest bedroom. The sitting area was perfect, quiet, comfortable, with thick carpeting that would muffle any sounds. Maria settled Sophia on the sofa, surrounding her with soft pillows and the worn stuffed bunny she'd had since birth. She left water, crackers, and more fever medicine within reach, though Sophia was too out of it to do more than whimper softly. "Mama will check on you every chance I get," Maria promised, kissing her daughter's hot forehead. "Please, please stay quiet, baby. Please." As Maria locked the door from the outside with the master key all housekeepers carried, she sent up a desperate prayer to every saint she could remember from her childhood. Just one day. She just needed to get through one day, and tonight she'd figure out a real solution. What Maria didn't know was that Alexander Thornton had changed his routine that morning. Restless and unable to focus after a frustrating call with his investors, he decided to take a walk through his own home, something he rarely did, preferring to stay sequestered in his office or gym. And his path was about to take him right past the guest wing, where a soft, heart-wrenching sound would stop him in his tracks and change 3 lives forever. Alexander Thornton had never meant to become the kind of person who lived in a mansion with 14 bathrooms. The opulence still felt foreign to him sometimes, even after 5 years of living here. He'd grown up in a modest 3-bedroom house in Ohio, the son of 2 teachers who'd instilled in him the value of education and hard work. His billions had come from brilliance and relentless determination, yes, but also from a fair amount of luck and being in the right place at the right time with the right idea. The money had changed many things about his life, but it hadn't changed the fact that at 3 a.m., when his mind was racing with code and possibilities and problems, he still felt like that scrappy kid from Cleveland who'd taught himself programming in the public library. That's where he'd been all night, lost in his home office, wrestling with an algorithmic problem that his team couldn't crack. By the time he'd looked up, his eyes burning with exhaustion, dawn was breaking over the Connecticut hills visible through his floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't settle. So he'd done something unusual for him. He'd decided to move. Alexander wasn't someone who explored his own house. He had his spaces, his office, his bedroom, his gym, the library, and he inhabited them with routine precision. The rest of the mansion existed as a kind of abstract concept, maintained by his efficient staff, and there if he ever needed it, which he never did. But this morning, restless and caffeinated and wanting to work the stiffness out of his muscles before attempting sleep again, he'd found himself walking the long corridors of the 2nd floor, past rooms he hadn't entered in months. maybe years. That's when he heard it. At first, Alexander thought he'd imagined the sound, a soft whimper, barely audible, like a wounded animal might make. He stopped mid-stride, his hand on the carved banister, listening. The mansion was old, built in the 1920s and renovated extensively when he'd bought it. It settled and creaked, especially in the morning when the temperature changed. But this was different. There it was again, a small, plaintive sound that made something tighten in his chest. Alexander followed the sound to a door in the guest wing, a part of the house he'd only been in twice since purchasing the property. The door was closed, which was unusual. Patricia kept all unused rooms open for air circulation. He pressed his ear against the heavy wood and listened. The whimper came again, followed by a word that punched through his confusion and went straight to a place in his heart he'd thought was long sealed off. Mama. It was a child's voice. Weak, frightened, and definitely not supposed to be in his house. Alexander's first instinct was to call Patricia immediately. His second was to wonder if he was hallucinating from exhaustion. But the sound came again, more insistent this time, and he knew he wasn't imagining it. There was a child in his house. Somehow. And whoever had brought them here had violated one of the fundamental rules of his household. He should have been angry. He should have stormed away to find Patricia and demand answers. But instead, Alexander found himself trying the door handle. Locked. He stood there for a moment, torn between irritation and something else he couldn't quite name. The child whimpered again, a sound of such pure misery that Alexander made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton." James answered immediately, professional as always. "Is everything all right? I need you to override the lock on the blue guest room. Second floor, East Wing." There was a pause. "Sir, I can do that remotely from here. May I ask?" "Just do it, please, James. Quickly." "Of course, sir. Give me just a moment." Alexander heard clicking through the phone, the sound of James accessing the smart lock system that controlled every door in the mansion. Then he heard the soft click of the lock disengaging. "Done, sir." "Should I come up there?" "No. Thank you, James. I'll handle it." Alexander ended the call and slowly opened the door. The room was dim, morning light just beginning to filter through the heavy curtains. In the sitting area, curled on the sofa under a blanket that had clearly been taken from the linen closet, was a tiny girl. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with a tangle of dark curls plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her cheeks were flushed an alarming shade of red, and even from the doorway, Alexander could see she was trembling. She was also the most heartrending thing he'd seen in longer than he could remember. The little girl's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the door, and she looked at him with confusion and fear. Her lip trembled. "Mama," she whispered hopefully. Alexander felt something crack open in his chest, a feeling he'd spent years trying to avoid. He thought of Emily, his younger sister, who would have been about this age when their father died. He remembered how small and vulnerable she'd seemed in those days, how he'd tried at 15 to be strong enough for both of them. "Your mama's not here right now," Alexander said softly, moving slowly into the room so as not to frighten her further. "My name is Alex. What's your name?" The little girl studied him with those huge, fever-bright eyes. "Sophia," she whispered. Then, with heartbreaking politeness, "I'm sorry I'm here." Mama said be quiet. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He crouched down near the sofa, keeping his distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. "You're doing a very good job being quiet, Sophia. You're being very brave." He could see the water bottle and crackers, the stuffed bunny clutched in one small hand. "Are you not feeling well?" Sophia shook her head, a tear sliding down her flushed cheek. "I'm hot. I want Mama." I know, sweetheart. We're going to find your mama. Alexander pulled out his phone again, his mind racing. He should call Patricia. He should demand to know which staff member had violated his rules so flagrantly. But looking at this sick, frightened child, he found he didn't care about rules. He cared about making sure she was okay. He called the kitchen instead. Richard, it's Alexander. I need you to bring me some ice water, a bowl of cool water with washcloths, and some children's fever reducer, if we have any in the first aid supplies. Bring it to the blue guest room, 2nd floor. Right away, Mr. Thornton, Richard replied, surprise evident in his voice but professionalism overriding it. Then Alexander did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called his personal physician at home. Dr. Morrison, I apologize for the early call. I need you to come to my house as soon as possible. I have a child here with a high fever, and I want to make sure she doesn't need immediate medical attention. While he waited, Alexander moved a chair closer to the sofa and sat down, maintaining a respectful distance, but staying where Sophia could see him. Sophia, do you know your mama's name? Mama, Sophia said, as though this was obvious. Despite everything, Alexander almost smiled. Does she work here? In this house? Sophia nodded slightly, then closed her eyes as though the movement hurt. Mama cleans. Mama makes things pretty. A housekeeper, then. Alexander scrolled through his mental roster of the cleaning staff. There weren't many. He'd insisted on keeping personnel minimal. There was Diane, who was in her 50s and had grown children. Ruth, who was younger, but had mentioned her teenage sons. And then there was the newest hire, the one Patricia had brought on 8 months ago. The quiet one with the kind eyes who always had her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Maria. Her name was Maria. He'd noticed her more than he liked to admit, though he'd kept his distance as he did with all his staff. But he'd found himself unconsciously aware of her presence when she worked in the library while he was there, the quiet efficiency of her movements, the way she hummed softly sometimes when she thought no one was listening. He'd noticed that she seemed to work harder than necessary, staying later than the others, always volunteering for extra tasks. Now he understood why. She needed this job desperately enough to risk everything by bringing her sick daughter to work. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Maria had checked on Sophia 4 times by 9 a.m., her anxiety mounting with each visit. Each time, she'd found her daughter exactly where she'd left her, fevered and sleeping restlessly on the sofa, the bunny clutched in her small fists. Each time, Maria had pressed cool hands to Sophia's forehead, whispered prayers, and promised herself this would never happen again. She'd figure something out for tomorrow, even if it meant quitting. But when Maria climbed the back stairs for her 5th check at 9:47 a.m., she found the door to the guest room standing wide open. Her heart stopped. She broke into a run, all thoughts of discretion abandoned. When she burst into the room, the scene before her was so surreal that for a moment she thought she must be hallucinating from stress and sleep deprivation. Alexander Thornton, the billionaire owner of the mansion, her employer, the man who valued privacy and peace above all else, was sitting in an armchair next to the sofa where Sophia lay. He'd removed his expensive wool sweater and was in just a t-shirt. Sophia's little hand was wrapped around one of his fingers. A woman Maria didn't recognize, wearing professional attire and carrying a medical bag, was gently pressing a stethoscope to Sophia's chest while Sophia gazed up at her with drowsy curiosity. And sitting on the coffee table was a digital thermometer, a pile of medical supplies, and an empty syringe that suggested Sophia had already been given medication. Sophia. Maria gasped, rushing forward. Baby, I'm so sorry, She stopped abruptly as 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. The doctors professionally neutral, Sophia's brightening with recognition and relief, and Alexander Thornton's unreadable. "Mama." Sophia tried to sit up, but the doctor gently pressed her back down. "Stay still just one more moment, sweetheart," the doctor said kindly. "Let me finish listening to your heart." Maria stood frozen, her own heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. This was it. She was fired. Not just fired, probably sued for trespassing or child endangerment or any number of things she couldn't afford to be sued for. She thought of her apartment, her dwindling savings, the health insurance she was about to lose. But mostly she thought of how she'd failed Sophia, how her desperate gamble had backfired spectacularly. "Ms. Rodriguez," Alexander said quietly, "why don't you come sit down?" It wasn't what she'd expected him to say. Maria moved on shaky legs to the sofa, sinking down next to Sophia and immediately gathering her daughter's free hand in both of hers. Sophia was definitely cooler than she'd been that morning. The fever reducer was working. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered, unable to look at either Alexander or the doctor. "I'm so sorry. I know I broke the rules. I know this is completely unacceptable. Her voice cracked. "My daycare provider had an emergency, and Sophia was so sick, and I couldn't miss work, and I didn't know what else to do." "All done," the doctor announced, straightening up and smiling at Sophia. "You're going to be just fine, sweet girl. You have what we call a viral infection. It's making you feel yucky right now, but the medicine Mr. Thornton's doctor gave you will help, and in a few days you'll be feeling much better." "This is Dr. Morrison," Alexander said to Maria. "I called her when I found Sophia this morning. I wanted to make sure we weren't dealing with anything that needed immediate hospitalization." Maria's head snapped up. "You called your doctor? For Sophia?" Dr. Morrison was packing up her medical bag with efficient movements. "Sophia's fever was 102.8 when I arrived, concerning but not dangerous. I administered a stronger fever reducer than what's available over the counter, and I expect it will bring her temperature down to normal range within the hour. She needs rest, plenty of fluids, and monitoring for the next 48 hours. If the fever spikes above 104 or if she develops difficulty breathing, you should take her to the emergency room immediately. But I expect she'll recover without complications." I don't understand," Maria said, looking between the doctor and her employer. "I thought, Alex, I'll leave the antibiotic prescription with you in case Sophia develops a secondary bacterial infection, though I don't think she will," Dr. Morrison said, deliberately not addressing the obvious tension in the room. "Call me if you have any concerns. And you," she added, smiling at Sophia, "keep being as brave as you've been this morning." The question stopped Maria's spiraling words. "What? If you leave here right now with Sophia still sick, where would you go?" Alexander asked. "Back to your apartment? To take care of her while you search for a new job? A job that hopefully comes with health insurance that will cover whatever medical care she might need?" Maria couldn't answer. She just clutched Sophia's hand tighter. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Sophia had fallen into a deeper, more peaceful sleep, her breathing evening out as the medication took effect. Very gently, he extracted his finger from her grip and stood up, motioning for Maria to follow him to the far side of the room, out of Sophia's earshot. "I'm not going to fire you," he said quietly. Maria stared at him. "You're not?" "No." Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger and more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "Look, I'm not going to pretend this doesn't violate house rules. It does. Spectacularly. But I also understand that you were in an impossible situation, and you made the only choice you felt you could make. I can't fault you for trying to take care of your daughter. But Ms. Wells, Patricia works for me, not the other way around," Alexander said, and there was steel under the quiet words. I make the decisions about who works in this house, and under what circumstances. And I'm deciding that this situation calls for flexibility, not termination. Maria felt like she might collapse from relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much, Mr. Thornton. I swear this will never happen again. I'll find a backup daycare. Actually," Alexander interrupted, "I have a better idea. But it's going to require some changes, and I need to know if you're open to that." Maria would have agreed to almost anything at that moment. "Of course. Whatever you need." Alexander glanced back at Sophia, sleeping peacefully on the sofa. When he looked back at Maria, there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read, a mixture of determination and vulnerability that seemed at odds with everything she knew about the reserved billionaire. "Your daughter needs someone to take care of her when she's sick," he said. "And based on what I've observed over the past few months, you're an excellent employee who works harder than anyone I've ever employed. You don't deserve to choose between your job and your child. So here's what I'm proposing." The morning sun had fully broken through the clouds by the time Alexander finished explaining his proposal, and Maria was certain she must have misheard him. "You want me to bring Sophia to work with me?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every day." "Not as things currently stand," Alexander clarified, leaning against the windowsill with his arms crossed. In his casual t-shirt, with his hair slightly disheveled from his sleepless night, he looked less like the intimidating billionaire and more like a regular person trying to solve a problem. "The current setup obviously isn't sustainable. But the east wing of the mansion has a series of rooms that aren't being used for anything. One of them could be converted into a childcare space, a proper one, with toys, books, a comfortable place for Sophia to play or rest. You could check on her throughout the day, and she'd be in a safe, supervised environment." Maria's mind was reeling. "But your rules?" "My rules were made when I thought I knew what I needed," Alexander interrupted gently. "Turns out I was wrong about some things. Privacy and peace are important to me, yes. But they're not more important than basic human decency. You're not the first person to face the impossible choice between work and childcare, Maria, and you won't be the last. If I can make that choice even slightly less impossible for you, why wouldn't I? But what about Ms. Wells? She'll never agree to this." A faint smile crossed Alexander's face, the first Maria had ever seen from him. "Patricia is excellent at her job, but she sometimes forgets that rigid rules can be counterproductive. I'll handle Patricia. The question is, would this arrangement work for you?" Maria looked over at Sophia, now sleeping peacefully, her color already better than it had been that morning. The thought of being able to bring her daughter to work, of not having to worry constantly about whether Mrs. Chun was available or whether Sophia was sick enough to stay home but not sick enough to warrant an emergency room visit, it seemed impossible. Too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" Maria asked, studying Alexander's face. "You don't know me. You don't know Sophia. We're nothing to you." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "When I was 15, my father died suddenly of a heart attack. My mother had to go back to work full-time to support us. She taught high school English and took on summer school sessions, tutoring anything she could to make ends meet. My sister Emily was 5 years old, and I watched my mother tear herself apart trying to be enough for both Emily and her job, trying to be in 2 places at once, constantly afraid she was failing at both." He paused, turning back to look at Maria directly. "I watched her cry in the kitchen at night when she thought Emily and I were asleep because she'd missed Emily's school play to cover another teacher's class, or because she couldn't afford the summer camp all of Emily's friends were attending. I watched her choose between her child and her livelihood over and over again, and there was nothing I could do to help her. I was just a kid." Maria felt her throat tighten with emotion. I'm not a kid anymore, Alexander continued. I have resources I couldn't have imagined back then. And when I found Sophia this morning, all I could think was, if I can prevent you from having to make those impossible choices, if I can use what I have to make one person's life even slightly less difficult, then maybe all of this, he gestured vaguely at the opulent room around them, means something beyond just me and my work. Maria didn't realize she was crying until she tasted salt on her lips. Your mother raised a good man, she said quietly. Alexander's smile was tinged with sadness. She died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. But I like to think she'd be proud of this decision. Before Maria could respond, Sophia stirred on the sofa, her eyes fluttering open. Mama, she called out, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. Maria rushed to her daughter's side, pressing a hand to her forehead. The fever had definitely broken. Sophia's skin was still warm but no longer burning. I'm here, baby. How are you feeling? Thirsty, Sophia said. Then her gaze landed on Alexander, and a shy smile crossed her face. Hi, Mr. Alex. Hello, Sophia, Alexander said, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. You're looking much better. Dr. Morrison was nice, Sophia announced. She said I was brave. And you held my hand. Maria looked between her daughter and her employer, realizing that in the time before she'd arrived, something had happened here. Some small connection had formed between this reserved billionaire and her tiny daughter. Mr. Alex was very kind to you, Maria said, stroking Sophia's curls. Can you say thank you? Thank you, Mr. Alex, Sophia said dutifully. Then, with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old, Are you sad? You look sad. Alexander blinked, clearly caught off guard. I'm not sad right now, Sophia. Maybe a little tired. Mama gets tired too, Sophia said wisely. Sometimes she cries when she's tired. But then I give her bunny hugs and she feels better. She held up her stuffed bunny. Do you want a bunny hug? Maria wanted to die of embarrassment. Sophia, Mr. Thornton doesn't need. But Alexander had already crouched down next to the sofa, his expression softer than Maria had ever seen it. I would love a bunny hug if Bunny is willing to share. Sophia pressed the worn stuffed rabbit against Alexander's chest in what Maria knew was her daughter's version of a hug, complete with a soft squeeze-squeeze sound effect. Alexander played along perfectly, even pretending to feel better afterward. Wow, he said seriously. That's powerful medicine. I feel much less tired already. Sophia beamed, clearly proud of herself. Then she yawned enormously, the medication and the lower fever making her drowsy again. I think someone needs more rest, Maria said gently. Mr. Thornton, I should take Sophia home so she can… Actually, Alexander interrupted, if you're both comfortable with it, why don't you stay here for the day? This room is more comfortable than most apartments, and it would give me time to start setting up the childcare space properly. You could be with Sophia, make sure she's recovering well, and we can discuss the details of the new arrangement. I can't just not work, Maria protested. That's not fair to you or to… Maria. Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. You've been working here for 8 months. In that time, according to the logs Patricia keeps, you've never left early, you've volunteered for weekend shifts at least twice a month, and you've consistently gone above and beyond what's required. I think I can afford to give you 1 day to take care of your sick daughter without docking your pay. Consider it a personal day. Maria felt overwhelmed by the kindness of this man who'd been nothing but a distant, professional presence in her life until this morning. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Alexander said. Just tell me what Sophia likes, and I'll make sure the childcare space has everything she needs. Over the next hour, While Sophia dozed peacefully, Maria and Alexander sat in the guest room and talked more than they ever had in 8 months of working in the same house. Maria told him about Sophia's love of butterflies and music, her favorite books, her fear of the dark. Alexander made notes on his phone, occasionally asking questions, his focus entirely on making sure he understood exactly what would make Sophia comfortable and happy. "What about you?" he asked eventually. "What would make this arrangement work best for you?" Maria hesitated. "Honestly, just knowing she's close by and safe would be everything. I wouldn't need much." "That's not what I asked," Alexander interrupted gently. "I asked what would make it work best, not what's the minimum you'd accept. There's a difference." So Maria told him about how she worried constantly while she worked, about how she sometimes called Mrs. Chun 3 times during her shift just to check on Sophia, about how every time her phone rang she panicked that something had happened. She told him about the guilt of leaving Sophia with a sitter even when Sophia was healthy, about how she missed so many small moments of her daughter's day. Alexander listened to it all without judgment, just nodding occasionally and making more notes. "What if," he said slowly, "we set up a camera system in the childcare room that feeds to your phone? That way you could check on Sophia whenever you wanted without having to physically leave your work. Would that help with the worry?" Maria felt tears threatening again. "That would help so much. Consider it done." Alexander glanced at his phone. "I'm going to call my assistant and have her start coordinating with some contractors. We can have the basic setup done within a week, sooner if I push it. In the meantime, when Sophia's feeling better, she's welcome to come with you to work. We'll figure out temporary arrangements until the permanent space is ready." "What about Ms. Wells?" Maria asked again, unable to quite believe this was really happening. Alexander's expression turned more serious. "Patricia and I are going to have a conversation about the culture in this house and whose needs matter. Don't worry about her. That's my responsibility." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Richard, the cook, entered with a tray. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Thornton. I thought the young lady and her mother might be hungry. I made some chicken soup. It's mild, good for upset stomachs, and some crackers and ginger ale." "Perfect timing," Alexander said. "Thank you, Richard." As the cook left, Maria noticed that Alexander had also arranged for sandwiches and coffee for her, small considerations that spoke to a thoughtfulness she wouldn't have expected. They ate together in companionable silence, Sophia waking up enough to sip some soup and nibble on a cracker before dozing off again. And Maria marveled at how drastically her world had shifted in the space of a single morning. She'd woken up terrified, desperate, certain she was about to lose everything. Instead, she'd found an unexpected ally in the last person she would have thought to ask for help. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in the doorway of what had been officially designated as Sophia's room and felt her eyes filling with tears for what must have been the 100th time since that morning when everything changed. The former guest room had been transformed into something from a children's fantasy. The walls had been painted a soft sky blue and decorated with hand-painted butterflies in every color imaginable. Alexander had found a local artist who specialized in murals and commissioned the work personally. There were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with picture books, a reading nook with pillows shaped like clouds, a child-sized table with art supplies, and a whole corner dedicated to dress-up clothes and pretend play. But more than the physical space, what made Maria cry was the thought that had gone into every detail. The rocking chair in the corner was the exact style she'd mentioned she'd rocked Sophia in as a baby, impossible to afford now but purchased by Alexander without fanfare. The music box on the shelf played the lullaby Maria hummed to Sophia every night. The nightlight wasn't just any nightlight. It projected stars onto the ceiling because Alexander remembered Maria mentioning that Sophia was afraid of the dark. "What do you think, Mija?" Maria asked, crouching down next to her daughter. "Do you like your special room?" Sophia's eyes were enormous as she took in the space. "It's like Princess Room," she breathed, "but with butterflies instead of castles." She turned to Alexander, who stood in the doorway looking almost nervous. "Mr. Alex, did you make this for me?" "I had a lot of help," Alexander said with a smile that Maria had seen more frequently in the past 3 weeks. "But yes, it's all for you. Do you really like it?" Sophia didn't answer with words. She simply ran across the room and wrapped her arms around Alexander's legs in the fierce, whole-body hug that only a 3-year-old could give. Alexander looked startled for just a moment, then his expression softened in a way that made Maria's heart ache. He patted Sophia's back gently. "I take that as a yes," he said, his voice a little rough. The arrangement had worked even better than Maria had dared to hope. During the weeks while Sophia's room was being prepared, Alexander had authorized a temporary setup in another guest room, and Sophia had accompanied Maria to work every day. The little girl had proven to be remarkably well-behaved, content to color or play quietly, occasionally wandering into whatever room Maria was cleaning to show her a picture she'd drawn or to tell her about the butterfly she'd seen outside the window. And somehow, in the process, something had shifted in the entire atmosphere of the mansion. Patricia Wells had been predictably horrified by the new arrangement, at least at first. Maria had overheard the estate manager's raised voice through Alexander's office door the day he'd informed her of the change in policy. "This sets an unacceptable precedent, Mr. Thornton. If we allow one employee to bring her child to work, what's to stop others from?" "Patricia." Alexander's voice had been quiet but firm. "I'm not interested in maintaining policies that force my employees to choose between their livelihood and their children's welfare. If other staff members have childcare needs, we'll address them on a case-by-case basis. What we won't do is pretend that people stop being parents when they come to work." "But the disruption." "There is no disruption. Maria's work quality has been exemplary, as it's always been. Sophia is a quiet, well-mannered child who, if anything, has brought more warmth to this house than it's had in years. The only person who seems disrupted is you, and I need you to examine why that is." Patricia had left the office tight-lipped and visibly angry. But to her credit, she'd adapted. She'd never become warm toward the arrangement exactly, but she'd stopped actively opposing it. And Maria had caught her, once, showing Sophia how to properly fold a napkin into a swan shape, her thin face almost smiling at Sophia's delighted reaction. The other staff had been universally supportive. Richard the cook regularly made special snacks for Sophia, claiming he needed to practice his baking skills. Diane, the older housekeeper, had brought in a box of her own grandchildren's outgrown toys. Even James, the head of security, had taken to showing Sophia the security monitors and letting her press the buttons to change camera views, which Sophia found endlessly entertaining. But the biggest change had been in Alexander himself. The reserved, distant billionaire who rarely emerged from his office had begun taking breaks, wandering into whatever room Maria was working in, always ostensibly, to check on some household matter, but somehow always ending up talking to Sophia. He'd read her stories in the library, his deep voice bringing picture books to life. He'd carried her on his shoulders through the gardens, pointing out different flowers and insects. He'd even, memorably, gotten down on his hands and knees in his expensive suit to help Sophia search for a fairy house she was convinced existed under one of the bushes. Maria had watched her reserved, serious employer transform into someone lighter, someone who laughed more easily and seemed less burdened by whatever weights he carried. And she'd watched her daughter, who'd been so shy around men after her father's abandonment, blossom under Alexander's gentle, steady attention. "Mama, come see," Sophia called now, tugging Maria into the room. "There's a secret door." Sure enough, what had looked like a decorative panel in the wall opened to reveal a small alcove, just big enough for a child to curl up in with a book and a flashlight. "Every kid needs a secret hiding spot," Alexander explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "I had one when I was young. I used to hide there when things got overwhelming." Maria met his eyes over Sophia's head, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection that had grown steadily over the past weeks without either of them quite acknowledging it aloud. "Mr. Alex, will you read me a story in my secret spot?" Sophia asked, already dragging him toward the alcove. "I would love to," Alexander said. "But only if your mama says it's okay. She's still working, and I don't want to interrupt." "Actually," Maria said slowly, "I finished my task list for the day. And I think maybe I could use a story too if there's room for all of us." Alexander's smile was warm and genuine. "There's always room." They all squeezed into the alcove, Sophia in the middle, Alexander and Maria on either side, shoulders touching in the confined space. Alexander read from a picture book about a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, and Sophia hung on every word, her small hand finding its way into Alexander's larger one. When the story ended, Sophia yawned and leaned her head against Alexander's arm. "Mr. Alex," she said sleepily, "I love you." The words, spoken with the casual honesty of a child, hung in the air. Maria felt her breath catch. She started to speak, to apologize, to explain that Sophia loved easily, and it didn't mean. But Alexander spoke first, his voice gentle. "I love you too, Sophia. Very much." Sophia smiled contentedly and closed her eyes, secure in the way only a well-loved child could be. Maria and Alexander sat in silence for a few moments, listening to Sophia's breathing even out as she drifted toward sleep. Finally, Maria spoke quietly. "She didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. At her age, she tells everyone she loves them." "I know," Alexander said. "But I meant what I said. I do love her. He paused, searching for words. "She's reminded me that the world is bigger than my work, that there's joy in simple things like reading stories and finding butterflies. She's changed my life, Maria. You both have." Maria felt her heart pounding. "You've changed our lives too. You've given us security, stability, a place where Sophia can just be a happy kid. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't owe me anything," Alexander said firmly. Then, more hesitantly, "But if you wanted to have dinner with me sometime, not as employer and employee, but as friends. Or maybe more than friends if you were interested in exploring that. I would like that very much." Maria turned to look at him, searching his face. What she saw there made her pulse quicken: vulnerability, hope, and something deeper that mirrored the feelings she'd been trying to ignore in herself. "I would like that too," she said softly. "Very much." Alexander's smile was radiant. "Really? Really? Though I should warn you, dating a single mom means you're dating the whole package. Sophia and I come as a pair." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Alexander said. "Actually, I was kind of hoping that was part of the deal." They sat there in the alcove, Sophia sleeping peacefully between them, and talked in whispers about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They talked about Alexander's sister Emily, who'd gotten married the previous year and was living in Boston, pursuing a career in social work. They talked about Maria's family in Texas, her mother who she called every Sunday, her brother who was serving in the military overseas. They talked until the sun began to set, painting Sophia's new room in shades of gold and amber, and somewhere in those hours, without quite meaning to, they began building something new, not just an employer and employee arrangement, but a family. 6 months later, Maria would stand in that same room watching Alexander teach Sophia how to identify different butterfly species from a picture book, and she would think about that desperate morning when she'd hidden her sick daughter in a mansion, certain she was about to lose everything. She would think about the sound of Sophia's whimper through the door, the sound that had brought Alexander to them. And she would be grateful, so deeply grateful, For the moment when a billionaire heard one sound through a door and decided to choose compassion over rules, love over isolation, family over solitude. Because that sound, that small, heartbreaking sound of a sick child calling for her mama, had changed 3 lives forever, bringing together a lonely billionaire who'd forgotten how to open his heart, a hard-working mother who'd forgotten that she deserved support, and a little girl who needed nothing more than to be safe, loved, and given the chance to find butterflies in unexpected places. And in the end, wasn't that what family was? Not just blood relations or legal arrangements, but people who heard you through the door and chose to open it, who saw you at your most desperate and decided to help anyway, who looked at your messy, complicated life and said, "There's room for you here, always." In Sophia's room, with its painted butterflies and secret alcoves and shelves full of books, 3 people who needed each other without knowing it found what they'd been searching for all along, a place to belong and people to call home.